All right, welcome to another deep dive. And wow, you have given us quite the mix on Booz Allen Hamilton this time.
Yeah, looks like someone's been doing their homework.
Wikipedia, some kind of internal document. You're really trying to get the full picture, huh? I gotta say, good choice.
It's a fascinating company for sure.
Most people, they hear Booz Allen, they think, oh yeah, that Snowden thing.
Right, the NSA leaks.
But that's just scratching the surface. We're talking over 100 years of history here, influencing how businesses work, how governments work.
They've had their hands in a lot of things.
You probably use ideas they came up with every day and don't even realize it.
That's the thing with a company like this. They're everywhere, but often behind the scenes.
So let's unpack it, shall we? What does Booz Allen really do? How did they get so powerful?
And what secrets are we going to uncover along the way?
Exactly. So, first things first, got to start at the beginning, right?
Always a good place to start.
Where did it all begin for this giant of the consulting world?
Well, way back in 1914, this guy, Edwin G. Booz, had this radical idea. I mean, radical for the time. He thought, hey, companies could really benefit from outside advice, impartial, unbiased perspective.
Someone to come in and say, hey, you're doing this wrong, try this instead.
Right, exactly. And that was basically the birth of the Business Research Service, which eventually became the Booz Allen Hamilton we know today.
So he's like the OG management consultant.
Pretty much. Considered the father of the whole industry. And get this, they were landing big clients right out the gate. Big names. Goodyear, the Canadian Pacific Railway.
Not messing around.
No kidding. And what's interesting is that this whole idea, right, bringing in outside experts, it started with businesses, but that kind of set the stage for their move into the government world.
Which is what they're mainly known for now, right? All those government contracts, the intelligence community.
Yeah, but how'd that shift happen? How'd they go from advising companies to being so deeply embedded in government?
That's what I want to know.
Well, it was a slow burn, really. It started after World War II. They started working with the armed forces on things like logistics, manpower planning, taking that business mindset, that focus on optimization, and applying it to the military.
Making things run smoother, more efficient.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they built up a good reputation in government circles.
Yeah.
And as their expertise grew in areas like, data analysis and cybersecurity, so did their influence, especially in the intelligence community.
Which makes sense, I guess. Governments are always looking for an edge, especially when it comes to things like intelligence and cybersecurity.
Absolutely. And Booz Allen was right there, ready to provide that edge.
And that leads us to, well, a pretty wild fact. By 2002, they were already being called, get this, the world's most profitable spy organization.
It's a striking title, isn't it?
And that was years before Snowden.
Right, way before that whole thing blew up. Think about it, more profitable than actual spy agencies.
Kind of mind-blowing when you really stop and think about it.
It says a lot about the position they carved out for themselves. This sweet spot where the public and private sectors meet. And they had deep knowledge of both.
So we've got this picture of them advising these incredibly powerful government agencies. But they weren't just, taking orders, were they? These weren't just passive consultants.
Oh, not at all. They weren't just advising on how to improve existing systems. They were actively coming up with new ideas, new ways of doing things. And some of those ideas, well, they ended up changing the world.
Oh, like what? Give me an example.
Okay, get this ready for this. They actually coined the term supply chain management.
Wait, what? Supply chain management. Like that's huge.
Yeah, back in 1982.
Wow. I mean, you use that term all the time now, right? It's like how business works.
Exactly. It's become this fundamental part of how businesses operate. And it all started with them.
I never would have guessed.
And it's not just a catchy phrase. It's a whole new way of thinking about how goods and services flow, how everything's connected. It revolutionized business operations.
It makes you wonder what else they've had a hand in that we just don't even realize.
Right. It's probably more than we know. I mean, another example, back in the 50s, they were heavily involved in developing something called PERT.
PERT?
Yeah, it stands for Program Evaluation and Review Technique.
Okay. Sounds very technical.
It is, but it was groundbreaking. This project management tool, especially useful for big, complicated projects. And guess what? Still used today.
So they're not just consultants. They're like idea factories, shaping how we think about things, how we get things done.
That's a great way to put it. And when you consider their connections to government, their work in areas like AI and data.
Yeah, it makes you think, what are they working on now? What's coming next?
Exactly. It's like they have a glimpse into the future. But of course, we got to acknowledge the other side of the coin, too. It wouldn't be a complete picture of Booz Allen without talking about some of the controversies.
Yeah, there's definitely a shadow side to this story.
Right. Got to address that.
And there's no way to talk about Booz Allen without mentioning Edward Snowden, right? I mean, those leaks back in 2013 exposing the NSA's surveillance programs, huge deal.
Yeah, it was a watershed moment.
And Snowden was a Booz Allen employee at the time.
It really changed the conversation around surveillance, privacy, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it also kind of highlights this inherent tension in what they do,
Yeah.
balancing national security with individual liberties. It's tricky territory.
For sure. And Snowden wasn't a one-off thing either, right? These sources mention a bunch of other controversies, issues surrounding the company.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. There was that Homeland Security contract. Started small, like $2 million,
Yeah.
but then ballooned to over $70 million. No bid contracts, raising questions about oversight, how taxpayer money was being spent.
Yikes.
And then there was that time, Anonymous hacked into their systems, stole military emails, passwords, the whole 9 yards.
Wasn't there some debate about whether they deleted source code or something?
Yeah, they claimed they did it to cover their tracks, but the whole thing was murky. Hard to say what really happened. And then, just last year, they had to pay a $377 million settlement for overbilling the government.
That's not exactly pocket change.
Nope. Seems like every few years, there's another scandal. You start to wonder if there's a pattern here. A sense of being above the rules, maybe. It's a question worth asking, for sure. Is it something deeper, a problem with the company culture itself, or maybe just a systemic problem with government contracting as a whole? It's hard to say.
Yeah, it's like they operate in this gray area. They've got so much power, so much influence, but it seems like there's not a lot of accountability.
And that lack of transparency, that's a real concern, especially when you think about how much their work impacts all of us, the policies, the systems.
They're shaping the world we live in, but it's all happening behind closed doors. Makes you wonder, who's watching the watchers?
It's kind of wild, right? All these controversies swirl around them, but Booz Allen just keeps on trucking. Still raking in billions in government contracts, expanding into these cutting-edge fields like AI, data analysis. Seems like nothing sticks to them.
It's easy to get lost in the scandals, right, and forget the bigger picture. But they are, at their core, a company about expertise, solving tough problems. They've helped shape entire industries, advised governments, even impacted our everyday lives with things like, well, that supply chain management thing we talk about.
Right, they've had a massive impact.
Makes you think, are these controversies just kind of bumps in the road for a company operating at this level? Or is it something more?
That's the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question. Hard to say for sure, but let's dig into one of those controversies, shall we? That $377 million settlement for overbilling the government. The details, especially what the whistleblower revealed, are pretty messed up.
Yeah, the sources don't paint a pretty picture. It wasn't just some whoopsie-daisy accounting error. Looks like a deliberate scheme to inflate those bills.
Yeah, and the whistleblower even claimed that she was told the Department of Defense was too stupid to catch them.
Woof. Not a good look.
Not at all. If those allegations are true, it points to something intentional, exploiting the system, taking advantage of how complex government contracts are. Basically, padding their profits.
And that's especially bad because it's taxpayer money we're talking about. Feels like a betrayal of trust, you know?
Totally. Raises serious questions about how effective the oversight is for these government contracts. Are these isolated incidents? Or is there something fundamentally wrong with the system that lets this stuff slide?
It's like that too big to fail idea we were talking about. If a company is this deeply involved in how the government runs, do the same rules even apply to them?
That's a valid point. And when you add in the lack of transparency in government contracting, it gets even murkier. Hard to know how widespread these issues really are when so much of the information is hidden.
Right. It's all hush-hush behind closed doors. Makes it really hard to hold anyone accountable.
Exactly. So we've got these financial scandals, questions about government oversight, but their work also reaches beyond the U.S., right? These sources mention involvement with foreign governments, some of which, well, their human rights record isn't exactly stellar.
Yeah, you're talking about the UAE, Saudi Arabia, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. On the one hand, it makes sense, right? They're experts in cybersecurity, intelligence gathering. Governments all over the world want that kind of know-how.
Sure, expertise is valuable.
But it's tricky, especially when you consider how those capabilities could be used. What if they're used in ways that violate human rights?
It's a slippery slope. Where do you draw the line? When does providing expertise turn into, well, enabling something you shouldn't be enabling?
That's where the ethical questions come in.
Well,
And it's a
shoot.
conversation we need to have. We can't just shrug and say, well, they're providing a service, someone's paying them, end of story. We got to look at the consequences, both here and around the world.
Yeah, the ripple effects, like their work with the Saudi military, for example. Saudi Arabia has been accused of some pretty serious human rights abuses.
Right. And if Booz Allen is providing them with training, support.
Are they contributing to those abuses, even indirectly? It's a tough question.
It is. That's the danger of this gray area they operate in. The lines get blurry, and it's easy to end up causing harm, even unintentionally.
And it all comes back to that lack of transparency, doesn't it? Hard to hold them accountable if we don't know what they're doing, who they're working with.
Absolutely. And, that lack of transparency, it's not just about protecting Booz Allen. It also shields the government from scrutiny.
Oh, so?
Think about it. If the public has no clue what these contractors are up to, it's way harder to hold our elected officials accountable for the choices they make about outsourcing these important functions.
I see what you're saying. It's like out of sight, out of mind.
Mm.
But really, it's a shift in power, isn't it?
Exactly. You got these private companies operating in the shadows, wielding huge influence on things both domestically and internationally, and we don't really know the full extent of it.
That's kind of unsettling when you put it like that.
It is. Raises big questions about the balance of power in our society. Are we really okay with this level of influence being in the hands of people we didn't elect, operating with very little oversight?
Feels like we're sleepwalking into a future where the lines between government and corporations are just gone.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought. And it's not that far-fetched. Look around. This trend toward privatization, it's picking up speed, right? Healthcare, education, even the military.
So where do we go from here? Can we do anything to push back against this, demand more transparency, more accountability, or is this just the new normal, like it or not?
I wouldn't say we just have to accept it passively. There are things we can do both individually and together. But first, we need to understand the problem, really get a handle on it.
Right. Can't fix what you don't understand. So let's zoom out for a sec. Big picture time. What does the Booz Allen story tell us about the world right now? What are the implications of this whole privatization thing, these consulting firms operating in the shadows?
I think it shows how power is shifting in the 21st century. It's not just governments calling the shots anymore. It's a much more complicated system, more decentralized. Corporations, especially those with specialized knowledge, tech expertise, they're playing a bigger and bigger role.
It's like we're outsourcing the government itself.
In a way, yeah. And that brings up all sorts of questions about democracy, about accountability, about who really holds the power, who's making the decisions that affect our lives, and are they looking out for us or just looking at the bottom line?
Yeah, it's not exactly reassuring to think that so much power is in the hands of people who aren't accountable to voters, operating with so little public scrutiny.
It's not. And it's something we need to be aware of, to think critically about. Because this trend, it's only going to keep growing.
So what does that mean for the future? What happens when corporations have more power than governments?
That's a tough question. But it's a question we need to start asking. Because the answer to that question, that's going to determine the kind of world our kids inherit.
Whoa, okay. Getting pretty deep here. But I think it's important to step back every now and then, look at the big picture. We can't just get lost in the headlines. We got to understand the forces that are shaping everything.
I know, right? It can feel kind of overwhelming sometimes, like all these huge forces are at work and we're just, well, along for the ride.
I get it. But I think it's important to remember that we're not completely powerless. We may not be able to just flip a switch and change the whole system, but we can make choices. Big ones, small ones, that can influence how things go.
Yeah, every little bit helps, right?
Absolutely. Awareness is huge. Understanding how these companies work, what impact they have, what the risks are, that's crucial.
Makes these deep dives worth it, right? Connecting those dots. Seeing the Booz Allen story, not just as these isolated events, but as part of something bigger. Exactly. Once you start to see those patterns, you start asking the right questions. Who benefits? Who's getting left behind? What happens down the road?
And those questions can lead to action. We can demand more from our elected officials, right? More transparency in these government contracts, stronger oversight for these companies.
We can support investigative journalism that digs into these things, exposes what's going on in the shadows, and encourage whistleblowers to come forward, even though it can be risky for them.
And we can be smart consumers, support businesses that do things the right way, and boycott the ones that don't. It might not seem like much, but imagine millions of people making those choices. That adds up.
Yeah, it does. These companies, they seem untouchable, but they do answer to someone, their clients, their shareholders, and public opinion.
Yeah.
If enough people start asking tough questions and demanding change, well, they'll have to listen.
So it's not about feeling powerless, it's about turning that feeling into something positive, right?
Right.
Realizing that we're not just spectators, we can actually do something.
I like that. And the more we know, the more effectively we can push for a future that works for everyone, not just a select few.
Well said. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From the early days of management consulting to shadowy government contracts, global power dynamics, and the future of society. It's been a wild ride. But what does it all mean for you, the listener, right here, right now?
The key takeaway, I think, is this. Don't underestimate yourself. Stay informed, stay curious, ask questions, and make choices that align with your values. Even in a world where it feels like power is concentrated in the hands of a few, your voice matters.
Booz Allen Hamilton, they're more than just a name you hear in the news. They're like this microcosm of the forces that are shaping our world, and understanding their story with all the good, the bad, the complicated parts that can help us understand what's happening around us, make sense of it all.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, to say the least. Hopefully it's made you curious to learn more, to question things, to keep digging.
Because that's what it's all about, right? The more we know, the more we can make a difference.
So keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep diving deep.
Until next time.